It's not just about the power of thought, but it's that whole intention. And so, where we put our energy is what we're going to receive. Intuition is acknowledged by academics and scientists, but quite a lot don't dare go near it. It's not necessarily because they don't believe it, it's because they have a job. Their job is on the line. For most people, there's some experience they have that actually shifts them. And then they kind of go on a little bit of a plateau and think, oh, nothing's going on. It's not just about igniting the spiritual, it's that the spiritual, physical, emotional, mental, everything has got to be in harmony and in sync.
So, Julie, you and I, we actually go back to way back to 2003
Yeah.
originally, which is lovely. It's just so nice to be regaining some of the contact with you again. Just tell us a little bit about who you are and what you're doing these days, and then we'll talk a little bit about the spirit of the serpent and all that time as well.
Okay. Okay, my name is Julie Soskin. I have for many years run what was the School of Insight and Intuition. We've now renamed it to Insight and Intuition International. The reason for that being is that we're now doing all our courses on Zoom, and obviously we get catchment area all over the world, which is wonderful. So I work as a teacher, facilitator, and I organize a lot of webinars and all sorts of things. I also do private consultations, psychic, spiritual consultations to people all around the world. So I think that's it in a nutshell.
Yeah, fabulous. It's very interesting actually because 2003, my world was completely changing because it was very soon after I started having the sort of what we would call a spiritual awakening,
Yeah.
to use that phrase. So and I met Hamish Miller, and we were setting up this project together, and he invited you and your dear husband Rupert as part of the team to investigate the subtle energies of the Merry Maiden Stone Circle in Cornwall. It was a fantastic 3 days that we spent down there, although it was quite cold, I seem to
It
remember.
was very cold.
But that's the nature of filming outside.
Yeah.
So, one of the things that has stuck with me right from those days, and really it's the foundation of everything that I do these days, it's something that you said, and it's the philosophy that you have, which is that intention is everything.
Yeah.
So, and that's really stuck with me. And I always go back to that. And really, a lot of what I talk about on this channel, on the YouTube channel, is about focused intent, the living intentionally. Tell us a little bit about how
Okay.
well, yeah, tell us about your background and how you got into that kind of way of thinking of things.
Well, at that time, I'd probably just finished my PhD or nearly finished it. And the PhD was on psychospiritual learning and what effect it had on the participants that joined these sort of courses. And what became very evident very quickly was the intent of the student primarily. And if you think about what intent is an energy, it's a very powerful energy. It's not just about the power of thought, which is, of course, very strong, but it's that whole intention. And so, where we put our energy is what we're going to receive. So that was a climax, if you like, to the research project I did at Surrey University. And in fact, that whole process actually helped me redefine and what should we say, replan the courses that we'd already started at I&I. They had a profound effect. And in fact, the lovely thing about that was that we were able then to offer our courses into mainstream education, which was our mission statement, actually. So we achieved that in about 2002. And we ran courses at Westminster University in London, Middlesex University, and other FE colleges. And I believe that some of our courses or contents of our courses are still being used.
Fantastic. Because this brings us to a really I think it's a really interesting point, which is that so often anything that is intuited is regarded by the mainstream, if we just classify this wodge of thinking as mainstream thinking, it's regarded as it's dismissed. In fact, intuition is largely dismissed as having a value, it would seem, when it's talked about in the public arena. But clearly, the work that you've done and what we see around us today, 2024, is this whole wave of far more acceptance of the intuited information that's available to us. Do you think that is the case?
The thing is, I mean, intuition is acknowledged by academics and scientists, but their attitude is it's like the mind is bringing all things together, which is part of it, probably. But the sort of psychic element, if you like, is, as you rightly say, disregarded, although there's a lot of work being done now between academics and scientists. And there are some really interesting organizations around the world that are trying to marry science and spiritual. So I think there is a lot of work being done, but I think you're right. On the whole, most academics, I don't really want to put them all in that slot because it's not all of them, but quite a lot don't dare go near it. And the reason they don't dare go near it is not necessarily because they don't believe it, it's because they have a job. Their job is on the line. And unfortunately, that is still the case.
I think it's something that will change well, I think it is changing.
Yeah.
I think it's very interesting though. So do you think that everybody is able to connect to the subtle realms? I tend to refer to all of that as the subtle realms.
Yes, absolutely, I do. Absolutely. I had one, and in fact, I wrote this up in my thesis. I had one student at the time that came to our school because her friend wanted to come. She had no knowledge, no interest whatsoever, but was literally keeping her friend company. Now, the friend only lasts 2 sessions. She went on, and at the end of it, she said she was librarian at London Library or London
British Museum.
Yes. And she said at the end of it, if I can get to this, then anyone can. And I thought that was a really good quote, which I used. But I think it's absolutely true. And what's more, I think most people, if not 99% of people, have some kind of intuitive feeling during their lives. Absolutely. You can even ask a hard and fast scientist and they'll say, oh, I had a feeling about that, or something came to me. They ignore it because the rational mind kicks in. But I'm willing to bet that the vast majority of people on this planet have some kind of intuitive feeling sometime in their life. Yes. And that can be, somebody said to me, and that was another academic when I did another webinar some weeks ago, said, well, you can't possibly train intuition, but absolutely you can. And there's no question about it. But of course, it is intent and willingness. It's like learning an instrument. If you're not willing to play the violin, you probably never will. It's like that.
Do you still teach people to actually tune in to develop that intuitive self?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's vital. I often refer to intuition as one's inner tuition. And absolutely, I feel everybody's got it without exception. And in fact, I go as far to say very successful, even business people, often are very, very intuitive.
Now, I suppose there's a difference between intuition as a means of gathering information from oneself and what we might start to call spirit guides and
Okay.
hearing
Yeah.
voices that give us that
Yeah.
guidance. Do you want to tell us a little
Yeah,
bit
I
about?
think there is a difference. And people come to it in all different ways. I mean, of all the students we've had, many and varied over the years, I suppose the most common comment I've heard is, I don't really know what I'm doing here, but I just feel pushed to come. It's like an inner push. It just doesn't go away. And I think there's something that has been, uh, what can we say, ignited within the person, and it sits there, and people tend to ignore it until it comes to a point and they think, well, what's going on here? So yes, I do. Now, in terms of the question you've asked about guides and stuff, that is a bit different, I have to say. Um, you can be intuitive and not really know anything or have any contact to guides or anything like that, because it's an inner thing. To me, be frank here, I think, and I hate to use the G word because it's a bit contentious, but I think we all have a spark of God within us. You can call it universal light force, whatever you want to call it. And that is your contact. Now, there's some people who do feel a presence around them. And that is true. And that can be trained also. I put that under the heading of mediumship, but they can be quite separate. It's not, if you're intuitive, it doesn't mean to say you've got guides and angels or you feel them. You might, but you might not. So I think there is a difference there. Yes, it's a different frequency, if you like.
It's all of this stuff is all about the power of the subjective experience, isn't it? And I know that you put tremendous weight on the individual has to follow their own individual
Yeah.
processes. Can you tell us a little bit about that side of things?
Okay. So this is actually what excites me most. I'm very excited about what makes a person a person, and it's their upbringing, it's their social contact, it's their parents, it's their genetics. If you want to pull into the mix, it's their past lives. It's all sorts of things, particularly the experience, their unique experiences that every individual has. So there's a lot of psychology involved in this, actually. So that's sort of a whole mix of things to make the person that they are. It's sort of a kaleidoscope of energies. And a lot of the work that I do is to dissolve any negative mindsets or negative impressions that that person might have because of their experience, their upbringing, and so forth. But I must say at this point, it's open to everybody. It doesn't matter what faith, belief, culture, or whatever they come from. It's the same thing. It's not, it's not about having a particular faith. It's other than perhaps a faith in oneself.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, it's a very good point. And it's also it is fascinating because that's one of the things that we share, because it is absolutely fascinating when you start to work with more and more people to see how they develop and grow when they start to accept the whole aspect of themselves and work with that whole being. And it really does bring into question the nature of the human being, doesn't it? It makes us a very, very different energy packet in a way.
Well, I mean, everybody has their unique energies. There's something that we look at, which we call trigger points, trigger words. Most people, pretty well everybody, will have a trigger word or two. So if you say that word to them, it will trigger something negative or something positive. So why are they be triggered in that way? And that's why I was hesitating to use the G word, God, because that is definitely a trigger word for some people. But it's very difficult to explain, as you well know, Tim. It's very difficult to explain in words what is going on. So it's the whole process is like, and this is why we call our main course unfoldment. It's unfolding those things that might restrict. So I must say it has a profound effect on people's mundane life, let alone their spiritual, because it actually allows them to be the best that they can be. So a lot of our students will go on and won't do anything spiritual, but it will help them lead a better life and a more joyous life, hopefully.
Yeah, absolutely. That's the goal. I would think that's the goal for most people, is to find a new depth of peace and a new depth of joy in their life. That's really, well, certainly that's what I mean.
Yeah, and can I just say something about the
Yeah.
word spiritual? Because, that, and in fact, when I did the first thesis, that was definitely a problem at that time. I don't think it's so much of a problem now. But being spiritual isn't about necessarily having a particular faith or belief,
Mm.
because spiritual is like the core, the essence of who you are, the spirit, if you like, of who you are. I think that's a really important point.
I think that's a really, really lovely way of looking at it, looking at the term spiritual, really. And your comment about changing a person even in their mundane aspect of life, I think that's kind of the point, isn't it?
Yeah,
It's
yeah,
it's not the wows,
no,
although sometimes and very often I think, I mean, do correct me if you feel this isn't correct, but certainly in my experience, what tends to happen is that as one opens up, there are a lot of wow experiences, because
yeah,
you're experiencing things that are just unusual at that time,
yeah,
and then they subside, and as you develop and then there's a process of integration through this that can take
yeah.
however long, and then that's basically when you come out the other side, is that it's just integrated into, oh, human being, but there are changes that have taken place.
I think it's different for different people. I mean, I interviewed, I don't know how many people, maybe hundreds. But it's different how people explain it. I can remember one student who had a very academic background, and they talked about an incremental shift. Um, but for most people, I think you're absolutely right. There's some experience they have that actually shifts them. And then they kind of go on a little bit of a plateau and think, oh, nothing's going on. And then they move on. But I think it's about the whole person. So it's not just about igniting the spiritual, it's that the spiritual, physical, emotional, mental, everything has got to be in harmony and in sync. So sometimes you can have a very spiritual experience, and then that has to integrate into your physical world. So it sometimes feels for students they're on some kind of plateau, but they're really not. It's just it's that whole integration process of every aspect of themselves. Mm.
This might be well, it's a philosophical question, I guess, but I know you're not scared of such questions.
Oh, I love them.
So, do you think that we actually have free will to choose
Oh
our?
my goodness me. That's the big one, isn't it? That's the big one. I think that it varies. I think, and this is not a derogatory statement I'm about to say. I think if someone lives a fairly simple life, which I would have to say in some ways I'm completely envious of, because a simple life is simple. Um, but if they have a simple life, they're born into a family, they go the same way, um, they're going to follow that pattern, and they may not jump off it. But I think, and there's a wonderful quote I often make. I haven't got it next to me, so I can't make it. But there is a clarion call sometimes. And I love that expression, a clarion call of one's own soul. And then that pushes the person. And I think if the consciousness is raised even a tiny bit, then I think there is free will. but I think it's sometimes within parameters. For instance, I had a wonderful friend who worked with us at the school. Unfortunately, he's no longer with us. Wonderful astrology, Derek Hawkins. And, there is a lot to be gained from astrological knowledge. But then I meet people who completely bound their life up with it. What's happening with Mars or Jupiter, whatever. I'm thinking, well, that's really like letting go of your own ability. So I think there is free will, but we live in this world. We live in an atmosphere of all sorts of things, depending on, where we live. If you take into the astrological things, there's that influence, there's all sorts of influences. But if you raise your consciousness even a tiny bit beyond that, then I think you do have free will. But it's a big question. I cannot be absolute on that, Tim. It's a huge question, one which philosophers down the ages have pondered on. I think it's important to think you've got free will. That much I would say. Otherwise, you might as well be like a jelly wobbling about in the universe.
Yeah, because if we were in a position where we thought we didn't have free will, if you apply that to somebody that's got an addiction, for example, they would just give up. I mean, they would just disappear out of existence. Bless them.
Can I just say one thing, because this comes up sometimes, and people say, oh, my guide told me I've got this message, I've got to do this, that, or the other. And I get a little bit cross because, free will is sacrosanct in spiritual law. And there is no benevolent being that will tell you what to do. I certainly do not tell my students what to do. I hope that I give them an atmosphere to be able to have intelligent, inspired things about their own lives. But it's not my job or anybody's job to tell someone what to do. And you hear sometimes people saying, oh, my guide told me to buy a blue skirt or something. I think, oh, Lord.
It's an interesting one because it's the way that I tend to look at it, and again, obviously I'm looking for your opinion on this, that if somebody hasn't done the inner work on themselves as a human being, and relating back to all of the things that you were referring to earlier on with like upbringing and general conditioning of life and circumstance and all of that. So in other words, if you haven't done the work on the trauma that we each inevitably get as we grow up to some extent, then what appears to happen as somebody, if they have a clarion call that is an opening up, and so therefore they're becoming open and susceptible to the subtle realms, then the information they get seems to be tarnished by that lack of work. Did you understand what I'm saying? Does that make sense?
Yeah, I mean, when I started out on this work, bearing in mind the age I am, there was very, very little literature. There certainly wasn't the internet at that time. Now you can look on the internet and there's some fantastic things there. And there's equally, I'm going to be frank, a lot of rubbish. I mean, and, be a master in 2 days. I mean, having said that, sometimes people do take really strong leaps and it feels like an enormous transformation. So, but, I think I would say, as this is going out, Tim, that, if you are, I'm talking to the audience now, if you are looking to further this, use your own good sense, intelligence, and intuition, because there's some great stuff out there. And equally, there's stuff that will just take your money and not do anything for you.
I think one of the problems is that people seem to actually lose some of their intuitive good sense when they kind of jump at the shiny thing, and
Yeah, and I'd say something else here. What works for one person on their journey may not work for another. So you could have friends talking and one saying, "Oh, I had this fantastic, you've got to join this and do that," but it may not be right for the other person. So you've got to find what is right for you. And just use your good sense.
Yeah. So just coming back to you again for a second here. You used to describe yourself as a sensitive.
Yeah.
Is that still the sort of label that you use? And I mean, and yeah, go on.
Good question. I mean, I think I sort of veer away from using the word psychic too much. And I think sensitive is quite a nice word. I am sensitive to energies. I do use them. I am an intuitive, but psychic now has so many different meanings for so many different people. I find that difficult. So I think sensitive is quite a nice word, yes. Having said that, I'm just putting on a course called Psychic Growth.
But labels are interesting, aren't they?
Yeah.
Because they do, it's like you said earlier on, about trigger words, they do instantly, the words we use instantly give different impressions to different people. And there's that whole thing about, people only hear what they want to hear and all of that stuff, and it's interpreted
Yeah,
through
I
that.
think the word I've used for a long time now is psychospiritual, but that isn't perfect. I mean, I use that word because it also involves some psychology as well. And I think you have to use some psychology in the unfoldment process. There's no question about it. I mean, we use some techniques that are used by transpersonal psychologists, for instance, that work extremely well. So the psycho is really psychology, and the spiritual obviously is the spiritual. But that word isn't perfect by any stretch of imagination, but it's probably the best we've got at the moment.
So, given that you include those sort of aspects in some of your courses, were you personally ever trained or taken training in psychology? It's just,
Well, interesting. No, I didn't do a psychology course. However, in the process of my thesis, I did involve myself with some psychology people, and I went off to various lectures and workshops and so forth, particularly those involved with the more transpersonal psychology. So I've read up and used it instinctively. And in fact, some of the techniques and exercise I used before I even knew anything about that actually tallied extremely well with what is used in sort of things like psychotherapy. But I would hesitate to call what I do therapy, although it probably is therapy. It's difficult, isn't it, with
it,
words?
and although we were talking earlier on about the fact that the wow experiences that can be,
Yeah,
you know, given
yeah.
or had, it's not the goal. It might be part of the process. I was just wondering because my audience would love to hear any of your particularly fascinating experiences, any experiences that you've had that were out of the ordinary, should we say?
Well, okay. So about the age of 4, I began to realize that I was sensing and feeling things that other people didn't. I spookily, up until the end of my teenage years, um, I used to sometimes be literally able to read somebody's thoughts. Now, this did not win friends or influence people at all. And I'm somewhat ashamed to say, not in an awful way, but I did use it rather mischievously sometimes. So I realized that for some reason I was picking up things that other people didn't, but I didn't have a word for it. I didn't know anything about psychic, spiritual, or anything. So what happened to me was in my late teens, I had an illness, not a serious one, but an illness. And a neighbor of mine said, "Oh, you should go and see a healer." I didn't know what a healer was. I just didn't know, but I had time on my hands. I was recuperating from a minor operation. So off I trotted to this healer. And I rang on her doorbell. She opened the door. I'd never met this woman in my life. I didn't know anything about it. And she took one look at me and she said, "Development group right now." And I actually stood rigid. I wanted to run. I thought, "Oh my God, this woman's an idiot or something." And it turned out she was a president of a spiritualist church, a local spiritualist church. And I don't know what made her say that, but she gave me some very lovely healing, and kept on and on. "You've got to go to this development course." So to appease her more than anything else, I started in this development group, which was very sort of old-fashioned, sort of spiritualist work. And I wasn't interested really in becoming a medium. But what I did observe, well, first of all, we did an opening meditation, fine. And I sat there thinking, I don't want to speak to dead people. What's going on here? I mean, I was a young girl. And the people in that group ranged from 19 to 90. It was quite a large group, probably about 12 people. And at the end, we did this closing meditation. And for the first time in my life, I felt myself. That is the only way I can put it. It was incredibly profound. I absolutely felt who I was in a way I'd never felt before. And obviously, that meant I carried on going to the courses. I've been called it a course. And that sort of led me, and this was not a career choice at all, but it led me to then being asked to work at College of Psychic Studies. And I worked there, and they asked me to do courses. And then I got to the point where I wasn't going any further with them and started the school. But what I want to say is that that definitely changed my life. There is no question that last meditation in that group on that day changed my life. Now, I've had other years later, I had a very strong transformation, and I really can't explain why it happened or whatever, but I sort of, having worked on certain frequencies, suddenly I was working in a different frequency altogether, and that's when the channeling material came through. But on a mundane level, I think, like everybody, there've been, awful things that have happened in my life. And really, those things, although dreadful at the time, led to really strong transformation in, even in a sense of how I approach, the mundane world. So yes, I mean, I have had a series of quite dramatic transformations, and each time one has a transformation, you think, "That's it, I've got it now," but there's always something more. I just would say, there's, again, quoting from one of my students, and he was talking about his major shift, and he said, he used these words and they've always stuck with me. He said, "All my constructs were wiped," which is really a powerful statement. And so some people do. It's like the carpet is pulled away. What we think was life, what we think was that, oh my goodness, this isn't how it is at all. So that does happen to some people, and to some extent, I think it happened to me.
Are you able to say what that transformation experience was that led to your channeling back then,
Hmm.
or not?
Well, I don't want to give the wrong impression.
Okay.
But it started, I was working at College of Psychic Studies, and the receptionist came up to me one day and she said, I've got this person who's come, I won't say what country from, but they come from another country. And they insisted that they speak to you. And I thought, well, you know, maybe it's some weirdo or something, you know. Anyway, I went to see this person. And first of all, I'm not going to go into detail because it's not relevant, but some of what he said to me, I felt was absolutely wrong and still do. However, this guy had the most powerful energy, and he literally said to me, I've come to awaken you. And even as I'm talking about it, I feel, you know, goosebumps.
Okay.
And something happened in that moment. Now, I don't know, anyone could have said that to me. I don't know it was necessarily about him, because a lot of what he was doing, I didn't agree with and still don't. But it is something happened, and my energy shifted in that moment. It was something, it was like it was the moment. And it actually happened to me once with one of my students. It's really weird because I don't usually touch my students, but this particular student was stressed, very stressed, and I got hold of her and I said something like, wake up, and I could feel her energy shift. It's like there seems to be a moment when all things conspire, if you like, to come together. So that my work changed in that moment. And in fact, that sort of led me to leaving the College of Psychic Studies because, and don't get me wrong, I'm incredibly grateful to them for the time I spent there. But I wanted to broaden the work. I wanted to really concentrate on the spiritual.
Oh no, that's amazing. I think what you've illustrated there really eloquently is actually although this aspect of reality is called subtle energy, the power of it is actually quite extraordinary, isn't it?
Can I just say that these transformational things can happen from very mundane things like great tragedies, or somebody losing their job or their partner. Sometimes that is like an instigator of a movement of energy. So it's not necessarily somebody coming down and telling you you're some great master or whatever. It can come from very, very mundane things, this shift.
Yeah, or or emotional peaks, as you were alluding to. Yeah. Thank you for that. Let's just move on, because I don't want to keep pulling at that particular thread today. Acceptance.
No.
I laugh. We share a smile because I'm doing some work with you, and that's one of the exercises that you set for me. Talk to me about acceptance as a concept.
The word acceptance is probably a more agreeable word than the old-fashioned word of surrender. But actually you're talking about the same energy. So when someone struggles, they want something, it's not happening, and all this goes on. If one can get to this point of acceptance, which is like heart level, it's unconditional. That's what unconditional love means. Unconditional love is not Cupid's, and it's not emotional. Unconditional love is not emotional, but it is love. It's definitely love. And that's the acceptance of where one is and who one is. And that releases an energetic clasp, and it's magical. And I think I've probably spoken to you about this, Tim. I was really pleased to read a book a few years ago by a very lovely man who heads up a very good organization. His name is Dean Radin, and he's written this book called Real Magic. And he describes it more in scientific terms, but he says the same thing in a more scientific way, because when one really gets to that point of acceptance, it's absolutely magical, because it's like that tight clasp was suddenly released. And it's the point where you've been struggling and fighting and fussing and all this stuff, and suddenly, do you know what? Here I am, accept where I am. And then suddenly everything is released and things start flowing. It's unbelievable, but it's very difficult to speak about, because it's like it's full-bodied acceptance. It's acceptance mentally, emotionally, spiritual, everything. And that is a very powerful energy. And of course, that's very difficult in life, particularly modern life, you know. But when people do get to it, the magic happens. That's your golden wand.
Where do you, last question really, but where do you fit magic as a practice into your belief system? Because you know, with all due respect, as far as I know, you're not a magic practitioner in the sense of Wiccan.
Well, we come back to that word intent, don't we?
Yeah, well, indeed.
So, you know, you can have magic rituals and they'll only work because of your intent. So, you know, I mean, I'm sure people interested, they can read up on all sorts of rituals and techniques, but they're only as good as the intent and the energy that's put it. And you don't actually need them anyway. But, you know, even in our churches, they have magic rituals. You think there isn't magic going on in our churches? Yes, there is. And they use the focus. But you don't need those things. It's intent. So.
I think, I suppose, my own personal view is that things like magic and even druidry or any of these structures or religion, formalized religion,
Yeah.
it gives a framework
Yeah.
for everything to hang off and
Yeah.
to be partaken with. And I think that you know, if somebody is drawn to that framework,
Yes.
great, good for them, brilliant,
Yeah.
fantastic, you know. But I certainly do tend to go along with you, as I did right from 2003 when you said it's all about intent, and look where it's got me. Julie, is there anything else you wanted to add, or to say to the viewers? You're running courses. Where would they find you?
Okay, so the courses are now all online, so you can look up the website Insight and Intuition. So that's spelt Insight and AND Intuition, all one word.com. Or you can contact me, email julie@juliesoskin.com. And we're doing some really exciting webinars coming up. I've got one coming up. And it's just called Life After Death ? And it's going to be very interesting because we've got on the panel, we've got people from very different ways of thought. So, you know, I'm expecting that to be quite lively, let's say. So yes, do contact us. But, you know, I mean, obviously, in these programs, it's only a snapshot of what anyone is or does. And it's, you know, I'm still unfolding. We're all still unfolding. And I just want to say, I don't have all the answers. I hope I've helped people over the many years I've been doing this. I'm not, you know, I don't put myself up to be anything other than just someone that cares.
Beautifully put. Thank you very much indeed. Wonderful.
Oh, can I just say one more thing?
Yeah, of course.
Joy. Look for joy. That's the most spiritual energy there is. Whether it's just looking at a leaf on a tree, at this incredible world in which we live. I know it's got problems, but it's still the most magical world. Seek joy. you.